Monsters. They lurk in the shadows, the deepest forests, and even in the hearts of cities. But what is a monster? Do they wear hideous faces, feed on the unwary, and leave trails of devastation in their wake? Some do, but in The Witcher 3, a monster isn't always what it seems. In the game, monsters are everywhere. From the skies where griffin and harpies attack unwary travelers, to the swamps teeming with drowners and water hags, Geralt is constantly called upon to hunt and slay these creatures. These hunts are one of the game's most iconic features, showcasing the meticulous research, preparation and combat skill required of a Witcher. And to many players, monsters in The Witcher 3 are just that, monsters. They're dangerous creatures to be tracked down and eliminated for coin. And on the surface, this makes sense. Many of the beasts Geralt encounters are predatory, hostile or even outright grotesque. They threaten villages, attack innocents and disrupt the fragile balance of the continent. It's easy to assume that a monster is simply defined by its inhumanity. But The Witcher 3 complicates this assumption. Not every creature Geralt faces is inherently evil. Some are victims of circumstance, acting out of hunger, territorially or pain. Others still possess surprising intelligence, even honor, and forces us to reconsider our preconceptions about what a monster really is. And that is what we will talk about in this video. What makes a monster? But before we dive into the complexities of monstrosity in The Witcher 3, let's take a step back. Where do monsters come from in the first place? Well, historically, monsters like werewolves, trolls and vampires have been fixtures of human imagination for centuries, rooted in folklore and fear of the unknown. In many ways, monsters were born out of our ancestors' attempts to explain the unexplainable. A mysterious illness that transformed behavior might have given rise to the werewolf legends, while hidden predators in the woods became trolls or ogres. The same can go for famines, plagues and many other things. These stories helped the early societies grapple with fear of dangers, disease and the supernatural. Monsters also served as moral lessons. Tales of dragons, hog guarding their treasures, or witches preying on the unwary often reinforced societal norms, warning against greed, hubris or venturing too far from safety. In this way, monsters weren't just terrifying, they were also symbolic. In the game, these traditional depictions of monsters are brought to life, but they're also given depth and complexity. The trolls that Geralt meets may still demand tolls, but they're not mindless brutes. They have personalities, motivations and even moments of humor. The game draws from folklore, but subverts it, asking us to look beyond the surface. And if we circle back to the werewolf example again, we can see in folklore that it is a creature of transformation, representing the monster within, bestial urges that need to be contained, the struggle between civility and instinct. Werewolves are often victims of curses or tragic circumstances, people struggling to retain who they once were, trying to resist their new urges, waking up every morning scared of what they might have done whilst not in control. We can see this exact scenario played out in the game in the Wild at Heart questline. And you can also start to see where the folklore blends into real life here. Because are those not also things that can happen to real people? Alcoholism, dementia or other issues might lead to similar results. Are those people now monsters? Many of the creatures that Geralt faces are so much more than initially meets the eye. Take the Noonwraith, a vengeful spirit of a betrayed woman. Far from being born a monster, she was driven to it by human actions. A theme that reflects real-life stories of people who are pushed into violence, desperation or revenge by neglect or abuse. Is she now a monster? Or a victim? Or perhaps both? So, monsters in the traditional sense often stem from the fears and struggles of humanity. But in The Witcher 3, the question becomes, are these creatures truly monsters? Or does monstrosity lie elsewhere? To explore that, we need to look at how the game uses monsters as mirrors to humanity itself. To go back to the historical example, societies have often labeled those who defy norms or challenge ideals as monstrous. Figures with unusual physical traits or those whose beliefs differ from the mainstream have faced persecution. In medieval Europe, for example, doctors, scientists and people of different religions have been persecuted and labeled as dangerous, much like the reactions people have towards Geralt or mages in The Witcher 3. And the prejudice towards Geralt as a mutant and a witcher shows how humanity often fears what it doesn't understand. The monster we see in others may reveal more about our own fears and biases than the true nature of those who we label. Because time and time again we see similar stories in our world where people are driven to acts of violence or revenge by cycles of pain and abuse. In psychology, the cycle of violence theory suggests that those who suffer often pass on their suffering to others. Like the Nunwraith, real individuals can be transformed by a system that fails them, creating harm and tragedy. Probably the best example of just this in The Witcher 3 is the Bloody Baron questline. While he's no supernatural being, his abusive behavior towards his family has perhaps even greater impact than a beast ever could. Abuse that in a way can be so much worse than just pain. Psychologists and social researchers have long studied the effects of abuse within families, which often lead to cycles of pain, trauma and violence. The Baron's story reminds us of how cruelty and neglect, even when not supernatural, can transform a person into something monstrous. His actions created harm not just for himself, but for his entire family. A theme tragically common in our world. And like our own, The Witcher's world is morally ambiguous, with choices that challenge clear-cut definitions of good and evil. This reflects real-world dilemmas, where political, social and personal decisions often have grey areas. Geralt's choices in the Bloody Baron questline are the perfect example of this. Because are you truly saving Anna from monsters, or just changing which one has their claws in her? And just as Geralt's actions have consequences in his world, our own moral decisions shape the world around us. Take environmental issues for example. Preserving the natural world often means confronting economic interests and making difficult sacrifices. Like in The Witcher 3, the path of doing what's right is rarely straightforward, and every choice carries unintended consequences. And this can be embodied in creatures like the leshen, an ancient guardian of the forest. The leshen isn't merely a monster, it's a symbol of nature's revenge against human greed. As deforestation encroaches on its territory, the leshen lashes out, not out of malice, but to protect its home. It forces players to consider the real-world parallels. What are the costs of progress, and at what point does nature strike back? And in many ways, the leshen serves as a grim reminder of the consequences we face when we exploit the environment. Just as the villagers in The Witcher 3 fear the leshen's wrath, we grapple with rising temperatures, wildfires, and storms as nature responds to humanity's actions. And like Geralt, we are often left to wonder, how do we balance survival with stewardship? How do we make peace with forces we've pushed too far? In this way, the leshen embodies the natural world. A reminder of what's at stake if we continue to exploit rather than protect. We can ask ourselves, who is the monster here? The leshen, who is protecting the forest, or the humans who are destroying it? And is it the griffin that attacks a village, driven by hunger after its mate was killed by hunters? Is it the cursed man turned into a werewolf who kills in a frenzy but mourns his victims when he's human? Or is it the villagers who drive out an innocent herbalist because they fear his knowledge of potions and herbs? In The Witcher 3, monsters aren't just creatures with claws and teeth. They're reflections of humanity's worst impulses: greed, fear, hatred and cruelty. All of these can make us monsters in a way no griffin or ghoul ever could. And what about Geralt himself? Is he a monster for the life he lives? Lives he takes, even if it's the name of protecting others? Or is he something else entirely? A bridge between the human and the inhuman? A reminder that the line between monster and man isn't as clear-cut as we'd like to believe. The Witcher 3 forces us to confront these questions and similarities time and time again. And in doing so, it holds up a mirror to our own world. How often do we demonize others because they're different? How quickly do we label someone a monster when we fear or don't understand them? Are the villagers who lash out in desperation, the nobles who exploit the weak for their own gain, really so different from the creatures that have been discussed in this video? In the end, perhaps the true question isn't what is a monster, but instead, what does it mean to be human? The Witcher's world offers no easy answers, just as our own doesn't. But maybe that's the point. By challenging our assumptions, it asks us to look deeper, to understand more, and perhaps judge less. Because the truth is, the monsters in The Witcher 3, whether human or beast, are never just one thing. They're complex, conflicted, and like us, shaped by the world around them. And maybe that's the most monstrous thing of all. The realization that we're not so different from the creatures that we fear. Thanks for watching.